morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Let me ask you a question. Can you feel it? Can you feel that the mood in the air has shifted? And no, I'm not talking about 100-degree heat, although we are dealing with that again. I'm talking about the obvious realization that Georgia's about to play a game on Saturday that is unlike any that it's played thus far this season. And one of those games that is, frankly, unlike most of what Georgia has done in recent years. Traveling to Tuscaloosa on Saturday. And the emotions are starting to reach a fever pitch in the way that you think it would when Georgia's getting ready to play Bama. A lot of evidence of that here today. And I'm going to talk a lot today about how I love the mood that Georgia fans are in already going into this one for Saturday. But it's the mood of the team that matters most. And one of Georgia's key leaders is also stepping up and speaking right now in such a way that maybe the vibe around the dogs, the players themselves, is also pretty good right now too. The stakes could not be higher. The drama could not be more intense. We are absolutely ready for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
When I have an agenda, I try to be very clear about what it is. I don't try to hide it or keep it a secret. I am very open about my agendas. Well, I have an agenda this week. My goal by the end of the week is to have all of you absolutely frothing at the mouth. And I mentioned this on social media last night that I really get the sense there's a little bit of an edgy vibe around Georgia fans right now, which I think is pretty fun. I really do. I'm going to give you some examples of that coming up, a few minutes from right now. I'm also going to do my part to kind of stir the pot a little bit more, to be an instigator. And what I love is that so many of you get this, and some of y'all are like sharing stuff with me right now that people are saying, people are doing. And all of this is about creating the right vibe, creating the right mood. An ornery, nasty, edgy mood, whether you're going to Tuscaloosa or not. I think that sometimes energy can be contagious. We want the right energy around Georgia football going into the game on Saturday. So coming up in a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you some evidence that it is where it needs to be and some examples of why perhaps everybody kind of needs to join in the fun on all of that. So we'll get there here in a minute. Let me begin, though, with this. Obviously, our mood going into a game on Saturday is really important for reasons I just described, but it's the vibe around the players and coaches that probably matters most. I believe we also have evidence starting to emerge that maybe that is also getting to where it's supposed to be there as well. And I don't think it's a big secret to say that on the field for Georgia going into the game on Saturday, I think the biggest question of all exists around the Georgia offense of, can Georgia score enough to win a game sort of like this? Because, if you go back and look at, the big games that Georgia's played in recent years, think about the big wins, high point total in a Peach Bowl playoff game against Ohio State, finding a way to get to 30-something, although that it did include a defensive score, in the national championship win against Alabama in 2021, putting together a pretty big offensive performance, including marching down the field a lot in the first half against Michigan in that Orange Bowl there that year. That big Georgia win seemed to coincide with pretty high point totals. And when you look at some of the most disappointing moments for Georgia in the Kirby Smart era, these were good games against big teams. And when Georgia lost, oftentimes it was because they just couldn't quite find a way to get into the 30s. Now, thankfully, we don't have a ton of losses to talk about here in recent years. But if you want to go way back into the annals of our mind, Georgia being held below 30 points has been kind of a culprit in some of the biggest losses. In fact, you can do this yourself. Once again, we're not afraid of you doing your own research. Go look at how many times Georgia scored exactly 24 points and lost. It's a really weird thing. One touchdown shy of 30. 24 points is like my least favorite number because it's been the final score of a handful of Georgia losses, somehow just not quite getting to 30, therefore not quite getting the win. Seems like we've seen some of that. So finding a way to be better offensively on Saturday against Alabama is a pretty big deal, especially a year ago when, lo and behold, 24 points once again wasn't quite enough to beat the Crimson Tide in Atlanta in the SEC championship. So we'll see with our own eyes how much improvement we see offensively from the Dogs here this upcoming Saturday. But there is certainly some evidence that the vibe is in the right place, because it certainly seems like key leaders are stepping up at the exact right time. And I want to start here with something that Kirby Smart has talked about, because one of the names that he was asked about going back to last week, making a big impact at Georgia and doing some big things for UGA, that's the transfer from Florida, the running back Trevor Etienne. And so when you think about Georgia being at its best offensively on Saturday against the Crimson Tide, boy, some sort of big effort from Etienne seems like it's a really important part of the overall formula, the overall equation. And I think you're left feeling that way even more and even more excited about Etienne's potential when you hear some pretty interesting words of praise that Kirby Smart gave for Trevor when he spoke to the media last week, but also a little bit of a realistic appraisal about what Trevor has been able to do for Georgia thus far. So to sort of set us up and get us started, let's hear Kirby Smart speaking about Trevor Etienne. This is from last week.
Toughness, great leadership, competitor. Trevor's one of the best, guy. I mean, I can't imagine what kind of leader he would be if he had been in the program the whole time, because he's not afraid to speak out and talk and speak up, and I respect that about him, because he doesn't, he hasn't had even a full year with these guys, but he's not afraid to speak up, and he's tremendous leader in toughness. So that's what I've seen out of him, and I think he's getting into playing shape. I think it hurt him some, not playing in that first game, and then he didn't play a lot in the second game, and then he played a lot in the third game, and I've challenged him, conditioning-wise going into that game, that I thought he might get more action than he had, and he did, and he took advantage of it.
So do me a favor. Put a pin in this. At the beginning of that clip, Kirby Smart says he's a tremendous leader that's not afraid to speak up. I want you to kind of file that away in your mind, because we're going to come back to that in a second. So put a pin in that for right now. The second part of that, though, I think is really interesting. When Kirby Smart says, listen, not playing the first game hurt Trevor Etienne. He's only just now kind of getting back to game shape. Now, we know all the reasons why he didn't play, and we're not going to get into all that. That's certainly been talked about plenty. But the fact is he didn't play, and he only played sparingly in the game against Tennessee Tech. And so, therefore, full-on game shape is something that Kirby Smart says that Trevor Etienne is maybe just now getting into, which is an interesting observation. But what it leads me to say is, for Georgia fans who are wondering, 8 quarters this year against Power 4 competition, Georgia's failed to score touchdowns in 5 of those 8 quarters. How can the offense be better against Alabama than it's perhaps been in some of the other games thus far this year? Well, maybe that's your reason. All of a sudden now it's 3 games worth of a season and a bye week. Well, maybe now Trevor Etienne, I know he dealt with a little bit of a banged-up shoulder in the Kentucky game. He says he's fine on that. And if we take him at his word, maybe now Etienne is ready to be an even bigger part of the Georgia offense against Alabama than he has been at any point in time other than that here this season. So if you're really looking for, hey, what are some tangible, beyond just hoping and wishing, what are some actual tangible reasons why the Georgia offense might be better against Alabama than it has been at certain points so far this year? I think that's a really big one right there. The fact that Etienne just may be a little more able to be a full part of that offense, based on Kirby Smart's own words, than he has been at any point in time during this season. I think that's kind of a cool thing to consider. Now, let me also go back to what Kirby said at the beginning of that clip, which is that Etienne, even though he hasn't been here for a full year, has stepped in and become a tremendous leader, and he's not afraid to speak up, and he's not afraid to speak out. So players like that, I always take their words very, very seriously. And there is something that Etienne said last week, our first time getting a chance to hear him with the media, that I thought was actually pretty interesting. That for a guy that has only been a part of the Georgia culture and sort of contributing to the Georgia standard for a limited time, was able to make an evaluation of what he thought was a couple of weeks worth of not quite being at that standard, but also a little bit of a promise about what he expects to happen moving forward, we would presume, including this Saturday. So the guy that Kirby Smart just praised as an incredible leader, listen to the way that Trevor Etienne chose to use that leadership mantle last week. Here is the Georgia running back.
I said we haven't been playing Georgia brand of football. I feel like it's something we want to get to. You know, we started off slow in the first 2 games, but I feel like moving forward, everybody's locked in, and we're ready to move forward.
So I think there's 2 things that are really important about that. I want everybody to kind of hear me close just for a moment. When you see Georgia be less than its best, I think that some fans get frustrated. I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's probably a natural human response, and it may be an accurate appraisal of the situation that what happened against Kentucky is not good enough. I think that some Georgia fans then take it to the next level of, well, does Georgia know this? Do they realize this? Or are they, too close to the situation, too kind of, inside on this? Do they realize this is not quite good enough? Well, you just heard one of the players in the team say, even though Georgia's 3-0, even though Georgia beat a ranked Clemson by, 30 whatever points, even though that there's seemingly a lot to like about UGA right now, you just heard Trevor Etienne say, we haven't been playing Georgia football. We haven't been playing our brand of football. That's an acknowledgement that some of you say you've seen. Trevor Etienne says he and his Georgia teammates, they've seen that too. So perhaps a week going into one of the biggest games that Georgia's going to play all season long, maybe some of you can take that as some comfort, because there is a lot of angst right there about, what might be going on the Georgia offense, and does Georgia realize there might be some problems? Well, Trevor Etienne just says it right there. Hey, we haven't been playing Georgia football, getting off to slow starts, things like that. Acknowledging that things have not been quite up to the standard that Georgia wants it to be. So some of you can maybe take some comfort from that. But perhaps you also take comfort from this too. Trevor Etienne says, and I love this phrase, we are locked in about getting it fixed. We are locked in about being better. Let me tell you something you already know. There is no better place, and maybe no more important place, to be locked in than when you go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's not Nick Saban coaching anymore, but Nick Saban's still going to be there. And whether you believe in this or not, maybe the feeling of the ghosts of the old Alabama teams of the past, and maybe in some cases the near past, problems that have plagued Georgia, real or imagined, maybe some of that still exists in the atmosphere there as well. And the only way to combat that, the only way to fight back against that, is to be as locked in as you can possibly be. Kirby Smart says one of our best leaders right now is Trevor Etienne. He's the guy that's not afraid to speak up. He's the guy that knows what's going on. And Trevor Etienne says, it hasn't been good enough, but we're locked in about being better. That's a guy that if Kirby Smart's putting his trust in Trevor Etienne, I'm putting my trust in Trevor Etienne too. Etienne says they're locked in. If that's true, Saturday night's going to be a lot of fun. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really, really happy to have you here and be a part of our program here today. Also, big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for the great work they do and their sponsorship of our program here today. Many of you know I was away from work or at least away from the studio for a little bit last week. Had a great chance to be a part of an event we were doing. Our good friend Cassidy from Pella Window and Door of Georgia was there. Love catching up with her. Come to find out, we're actually essentially neighbors now, which is kind of a fun thing. Love sharing community with her. And I love the fact that Pella Window and Door of Georgia has enriched so many of your communities by making homes look better, feel better. That's what great windows and doors are all about. So make sure you check out Pella Window and Door of Georgia for all of that too. Stop by and see them at their Experience Center there in Duluth. You can kind of put your hands in the product. I'm kind of a tactile person. I like to touch things. I like to touch the windows, touch the doors, feel the substance, feel what makes them different and better. And at Pella Window and Door of Georgia right there in Duluth, you can do that. Also, new website that we want to make sure you see and know. It's kind of nice and clean and streamlined. It's just simply PellaGA.com. Very easy to remember. PellaGA.com. Obviously, Pella is P-E-L-L-A. PellaGA.com. You also call 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Make sure you take advantage of great savings. A few more days to do this between now and September 30th. You can get 10% off a Pella project plus no interest if paid in full within 12 months. That is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. Keeping the expensive energy that you pay so much for on the inside where it's supposed to be, and improving the curb appeal on the outside where you have a chance to have all kinds of benefits from that, including maybe extra resale value when you go to sell your home at some point in time. Just find out today why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. But when you reach out, make sure you tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily said they'd take good care of you, because they certainly have been for folks in our audience for years and years and years. I love the work that Pella does. I love seeing that Pella sticker on windows, because if it's a builder that's using that product or anything like that, you know they're taking the best possible care to make sure they use the best possible materials to make your home as comfortable and energy efficient as it can possibly be. That is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. All right, we are going to get Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. A lot to do with John today. Georgia trying to get healthier for the game against Alabama, trying to fight against some of the recent history in this series against Alabama. We're going to cover all of that. But prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse here today, poured by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, as I told you before, I have a very obvious, clear agenda. I want you fired up, and I want you, edgy, a little bit angry maybe. It seems like Georgia is good when Georgia fans are a little bit in a bad mood. And I would say there's a little saltiness in the air here right now. So let's lean into that here a little bit. One of the things that I think you need to be on guard for is, and I'll show you this on the screen, our friends over at ESPN College Game Day announcing, as expected, that they will be in Tuscaloosa for the game on Saturday. And obviously Fowler and Herbstreit will have the game there on Saturday night. Now, here's my warning to you, and you already know this. Georgia's fans' relationship with ESPN College Game Day is not great right now. David Pollock's no longer on the show. Pat McAfee acted like a total doofus a couple of times last year as it related to Georgia. There's just a little bit of a strained relationship between Georgia and ESPN's College Game Day. After this Saturday, it will be worse, because what they are going to do, the absolute, self-immolation of Nick Saban back in Tuscaloosa, and the genuflecting they'll do for him, homecoming there with the Crimson Tide, making a huge deal about all of that. You as a Georgia fan are going to have to do everything you can to keep from vomiting when you watch the way they're going to love all over Saban as he goes back to Tuscaloosa. And there is some precedent for this. For those of you that are NFL fans, you'll remember last Monday night when the Falcons were playing against the Eagles, what they did on the ESPN broadcast with Jason Kelsey going back to Philadelphia. This wasn't just one of those things that made Falcons fans mad. If you follow this kind of stuff, many of you don't, but if you follow like the people that cover sports media, things like that, there were a lot of very stern columns and criticisms of ESPN for just making such a big deal of Jason Kelsey and essentially turning a Monday Night Football broadcast pregame and in-game into the Jason Kelsey and / Philadelphia Eagles show. It was kind of thought to be pretty gross. So ESPN has already done this, and ESPN can't seemingly do anything that's not heavy-handed. So we would assume that they're going to use the exact same playbook for Nick Saban on Saturday. Be ready for that. And as I said on X, the social media platform at some point this weekend, the only choice for Georgia is just to win and ruin the day. You can't stop them from turning this into just sort of a deification of Nick Saban. You can't stop them from doing that, but you can make them look like fools when the game is over. And that's really the only choice for Georgia there on Saturday. So be ready for all of that. Also, as a way of kind of continuing to sort of stir the pot here a little bit, in addition to, being ready for game day there on Saturday, some of you are reaching out to me and you're letting me know kind of some of the stuff that's out there as well. We had a great Georgia fan who kind of lives in essentially the enemy territory between say Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, that area. The radio station there, you've heard me mention it before. I think we in fact mentioned it on Friday's show, going back to what Jalen Milroe once said on that radio station. But the radio station there's WJOX. It is a Crimson Tide radio station. There's just all there is to it. Alabama fans all over the place there, and I'm sure they probably hate us just as bad. I'm sure we're not. We're fairly self-aware here. But a lot of you were sort of stuck in enemy territory, kind of letting me know some of the stuff that's out there right now. So if you want to kind of have a good full idea of just how, I mean, maybe Georgia just shouldn't show up. I mean, maybe right now Georgia just doesn't have any business even being in Tuscaloosa there on Saturday. There's a gambling expert. I use expert in air quotes here. His name is Brian Edwards. He goes on WJOX. Listen to how sure he is, apparently, that Alabama wins this game on Saturday. This is the gambling expert, Brian Edwards from WJOX.
In your opinion, is it too early to fire something in on that game, or are you going to kind of let this percolate a little bit before you fire something for next week?
Well, I don't have a FanDuel account. If I did, I would have fired on Bama +4 last week. Georgia's still Alabama's. Alabama's won 8 of 9 over them. They haven't won it. Bryant Denny and Stafford threw that overtime touchdown pass back in 2007.
So listen, you know, some people like gambling, some people don't. Here's what I'll tell you. If you're a so-called gambling expert and you're making evaluations of a football game in 2024 based on something that happened in 2007 or something that happened way back in like 2017, then you deserve to lose every dollar you have. And obviously, if that's the way you're making your bets, you likely will do that. Now, listen, I'm also not some sort of grifter that's going to tell you for a guaranteed, for certain, for sure that Georgia's going to win this game. We'll have our official pick on this a little bit later on. Obviously, we're not going to pretend that it's easy, but certainly we're also going to point out when other people are erroneously pretending it's easy on the other side. And citing something from like the early days of Kirby Smart as definitive proof of what's going to happen here in this game in 2024, frankly, that's essentially bordering on malpractice. And anyone who takes gambling advice from someone who uses, you know, that sort of logic to make the picks that he's making, well, they deserve to get whatever's coming their way for making that decision. But it's actually not the most annoying clip that we have to share for you here today. In addition to Brian Edwards, the gambling expert, you've also got the relatively new Alabama play-by-play man. His name is Chris Stewart. Now, we've played Chris Stewart on the show before. We've had a reason to do that. And by the way, let me give a shout-out to Jim Sparrow. Jim's the one that shared all this, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to get me stirred up because I would get all you stirred up. So Jim shared this. There's Chris Stewart, the Alabama play-by-play man. This is essentially, you know, the replacement for Eli Gold there. We've played Chris Stewart on our show before for similar reasons. Here is a very, very confident-sounding Alabama play-by-play man, along with the radio host on WJOX. They are apparently quite sure that this is going to be an easy Alabama win there on Saturday. So enjoy this and kind of get stirred up on all of that.
And I realize what Georgia was able to do in the first week of the season, in the second half primarily against Clemson. But no McConkey, no Brock Bowers, there's no George Pickens lining up for the Dogs. Right. It just doesn't seem, fair or unfair, it doesn't seem like that offense has as many weapons at its disposal as it's had in the past. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And here's the thing. Bama's going to score. Alabama's going to get their points. And let's say you hold the Tide below their season average and you only give up 35. Alabama's defense is much better than people anticipated coming into the year. And you better be able to score points if you're going to beat Alabama. And I don't know that Georgia is capable of doing that.
I don't know that Georgia's capable of scoring points. Yeah, they may have beaten Clemson 34-3, but I'm not sure they're capable of scoring points. And if you looked at Alabama's season average that was concocted on wins against Wisconsin, Western Kentucky, and barely beating South Florida, but have you seen their season average? Like, that's what passes for logic in the Yellow Hammer State. You know, listen, I'm not going to do what they do. I'm not going to guarantee anything about Georgia. We'll have a pick, and obviously we have reason to believe that Georgia could be in good shape here. But I'm not going to do what they do and act like it's going to be some easy thing. But as I said before, we're not afraid to point out when the logic's not exactly robust. And in this particular case, it seems to be a little glossing over the Georgia win against Clemson and some of the preseason prognostication that's going on. But in fairness here, it's not just, you know, dyed-in-the-wool Alabama homers. In the case of Brian Edwards, he's also a big Florida fan. It's not just non-Georgia people who are doing that. Our friends over at Dog Post were apparently watching the ABC, I think it was ABC, whatever network is on. I wasn't watching this time. The Clemson win against NC State on Saturday. So you had Greg McElroy and Sean McDonough doing this game. And apparently one of them, according to what Dog Post has reported, said after Clemson completely whitewashed, absolutely just blasted NC State to the sun. Apparently now the UGA game, more than anything, looks like a fluke. So for Clemson getting demolished by Georgia, that wasn't proof of how good Georgia is. That was just sort of, disregard. Hey, nothing to see here. Disregard that. That was just sort of a fluke for Clemson. Not a valid data point of Georgia's potential excellence, but a dismissive blight on what otherwise would be an excellent Clemson football team. It's a fluke. That's what they're saying here right now. And more examples of that. Wes Durham, a guy that I don't dislike, Falcons broadcaster, a guy who's very closely tied to the ACC, kind of furthering the same narrative here, saying, whatever happened against Georgia in week 1 for Clemson's offense has clearly been moved on from. The last 5 quarters, the Tigers have scored 94 points. Well, there you go. All it took for Clemson to fix its offense was to simply not be playing Georgia anymore. Have you noticed that it gets a little easier when you're playing Appalachian State and NC State? Have you noticed it gets a little easier when you're not playing Georgia anymore? So there's where it is. There's where it is. Georgia beat Clemson 34-3. Clemson's been great ever since then, but somehow that's not proof of anything for Georgia. But the fact that Georgia didn't get off to the world's fastest start against Clemson is somehow proof for the people over in Alabama or so-called gambling experts or broadcasters on ESPN that somehow Georgia has no right to show up. No need to. Already decided. ESPN's there to kind of deify Nick Saban, and the entire day is going to be a continuation there of that thing. Let me leave you with just this one thing, though. I got a really fun message from a Georgia fan. Her name's Kathy, and she put out something to me that I think is kind of getting us to sort of where we want to be here on this. Do we have this? Can we show from Kathy on the screen here about the fact that to her, all of this just sort of reminds you of some of the build-up to the game for Georgia against Tennessee in 2002 and 2022. That's what Kathy had said. And I think we can't guarantee the result's going to be the same. But the build-up right now sort of does feel the same. It certainly feels like right now people have just sort of decided, even after a blowout win against a ranked opponent on a neutral field, that somehow Georgia's just not all that impressive. Just not all that impressive. Easily dismissed, easily disregarded. We've seen Georgia make people look like fools in the past who've tried to push that notion and push that narrative. And maybe on Saturday, we'll see it happen again. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, listen, in kind of a bad mood maybe about a rivalry game on Saturday, but always in a good mood when it comes to Dr. Pepper, because it is the ultimate choice for game day. When you're getting settled in, listen, on Saturday, I had a good time. And you better believe, sure enough, Dr. Pepper was a big part of that for me, and I mean that literally, legitimately. Sitting on the back porch and watching some football games and enjoying some Dr. Pepper while I did. You better believe I was doing that. And you're doing the same thing, too, as you're stocked up for your watch party or your tailgate or whatever you're doing for this Saturday's game. Make sure you're enjoying the ice-cold, one-of-a-kind, delicious flavor of Dr. Pepper as you do. After all, it's a pepper thing. We love Dr. Pepper, and we love having them a part of DawgNation Daily and Around the Doghouse here today. All right, before we're done, a little bit of controversy. One SEC coach has said something after a loss that has gotten a lot of people, including one of his former players, pretty upset. We'll give you information on that. We'll also talk about the one UGA rival right now that seems to be sort of figuring some stuff out. What does that mean moving forward? And a star player has also suffered a season-ending injury. Bad news there. We'll tell you all about that. But for now, what's it going to take to actually beat Alabama and make all these naysayers look wrong in the process? Let's find out more from the former All-American himself. It's Jon Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let me say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. Always happy to have him as a part of our show. And, John, historically, Alabama is not really a rival for Georgia because the two teams just haven't played very much. I mean, in your career, you played them in, 2002? Is that the only time you played Alabama, perhaps? A lot of Georgia players go a long time with rarely playing Alabama. So historically, you would not consider Georgia a rival to Alabama, but in terms of the feeling conjured up when you do play them, one of these rare regular season moments like it's going to take place on Saturday, there is no doubt that I would say that Alabama kind of brings the emotions out for the average Georgia fan in a way that few other opponents, even ones that Georgia has a lot more history with, few other opponents seem to bring it out the way that the Crimson Tide, and part of that's to their credits because they've won a lot of games. But it's just it may not be a rivalry as dictated by tradition and history, but it is certainly a rivalry as described by the feelings it conjures up, correct?
It is in this generation. In the Kirby Smart head coach era, this is arguably our biggest rival. You look at, historically, it was probably, it depends on what part of the state you're on. If you're in the West, it could have been Auburn, or if you're from North Georgia, it's Tennessee, South Georgia, it's Florida. But those teams are all down. And during this Coach Smart era, the biggest bear that we face, what seems like on an annual basis, primarily in the postseason, is Alabama. So this has certainly been a week that we've all circled for quite some time because it's the two biggest, baddest, best programs in college football in the past decade, and now we get to see it in regular season.
So let me ask you, there's obviously the hope among Georgia fans that while Georgia has been, they're undefeated, they beat Clemson very badly, most programs would be enviable of the position Georgia finds itself in. And yet there's also the real truth that Georgia probably does need to play better against Alabama than it certainly played for long stretches of the game against Kentucky. So how do you do that? I mean, both like mentally, but also from a execution standpoint, like how do, as a team, as a player, coaches leading those players, how do you find a way to now be at your best in a game and where the stakes are just a lot higher than anything that you've dealt with thus far this season?
Yeah, as a player, you have to be mentally sharp. You have to be cued in on exactly what your assignment is. And I've seen Terrence Edwards, another DawgNation loyalist, and him on Friday nights, and his slogan is "Do your job."
Yeah.
And that rings true at every level. And for Georgia to be successful against Alabama, the players are going to have to do their job. The decision makers, and I'm going to throw Carson Beck in as a decision maker, not just the coordinators, not just the coaches, but being able to put your team in the right position and the right play, make the right decisions. That's going to be paramount on Saturday. It's going to be key for Georgia's offense to get rolling, that we see and recognize early what Alabama's defense is trying to do and put ourselves in a position to be successful. I think you look back at Kentucky specifically, there are opportunities where I'm shaking my head going, the world's best teams wouldn't be successful with this play in this look. So just decision-making and figuring out, if it's a read, then we need to make the right read. If it's a check, we need to make the right check. If it's understanding what they're doing and having the right plays called, that's important. We have to be able to put our guys in positions to be successful. And multiple times against Kentucky, you watch how the plays played out. And yes, we can execute better. Yes, we can block them up better, but there's still a free defender in that space. Or based on coverage, those routes aren't going to be as effective. And so you're looking at checkdowns. And sometimes checkdowns are fine. You take what the defense has given you. But I think putting ourselves in positions to be successful more often is part of that recipe that this game is going to mandate. We have to play better, we have to execute better, and we have to be in situations that we can be successful. So it's comprehensive. I was listening to you beforehand. It's funny how, this time of year, there's so few data points that you draw these absurd conclusions, right? So if A and B are true, then C must be true. So if Alabama has dominated these weakling teams and they're averaging X number of points a week, then obviously they're going to score against Georgia's defense. That's irrational logic, right? That just doesn't make any sense. Georgia's defense has yet to allow a touchdown, and that's with the number of players, especially across that defensive front, that they've had to rotate and replace. You talk about the studs that they have up front that have not been available consistently, and yet Georgia has been able to overcome those things. I think that gets lost in the shuffle at times, and hopefully this past bye week, it gives them an opportunity to get a little bit healthier.
Yeah, you're making an interesting point. I want to see if I can explain this in a way that makes sense to people. Obviously, as college football fans, we make a very big deal about very, very small sample sizes of information, right? Even a full season, 12 games, a regular season, is in itself kind of a small sample size. You know what I'm saying? Like 12 games, if you really think about it, compared to a 162-game Major League season or an 82-game NBA season, like 12 data points is actually a pretty small sample size to really make a lot of sense out of. So football is just sort of a small sample size sport, and those of us who are football fans, we magnify the importance of these very, very small pieces of data, this very, very small, limited amount of information. So when we are doing something like that on a portion of a season, I think at the very least we have to acknowledge that these small pieces of information have to all count equally. In other words, you can make a big deal, and this is to Georgia fans as much as it is to non-Georgia fans, because there are a bunch of Georgia fans out there right now who are doing some version of this themselves. You can make a really big deal out of Georgia squeaking past Kentucky. You can do that. But you have to weigh the blowout win against Clemson equally. You just do. Like you can't make a bigger deal about Kentucky because it happened more recently than the game against Clemson. And it's Alabama homers who are doing that, but it's also kind of the more cynical-minded Georgia fans who are doing a little bit of that. That if we're going to magnify the importance of small sample sets, and as college football fans, that's sort of the definition of a college football fan. That if we're going to blow this stuff up, when it comes to portions of a season, I think we have to consider these data points at least equally. That a squeaker against Kentucky is of equal value to a blowout win against Clemson. You have to think about those things as in the same size in your mind. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It does to me. I know this. Georgia will need to play better than they did against Kentucky to beat Alabama. That's true. It doesn't mean that, Alabama's a foregone conclusion. They're going to win this game. And nor can we just ignore the fact that they beat Clemson, and Clemson has proven to be probably better than what they showed in week one. And, I think back to you talk about a season's worth of data. And I think back to when we played TCU in a pretty big game. And Georgia seems to always show up really well in big games. And statistically, TCU is coming into that game, and you look at the numbers. If you only look at the numbers, you're going, Georgia might be in trouble. We see how that played out. Yeah. It's kind of like, if I were to go one-on-one against my son, who's 14, my stats are going to be pretty good. If I go up against Richard Seymour, it's not going to be impressive. So it makes a difference as to who you play and how you play against them. And, in these big games, I think you see a different level of performance from both sides. And some teams are made as front runners, where as long as they can bully somebody, they can put up these gaudy numbers. But when you go up against a capable opponent, it's a much different game that gets played out. And I think Georgia is built in a way that they can succeed consistently in those big moments, even if some of those quote unquote lesser games, they don't put up the gaudy numbers that some of these other programs do.
So you mentioned Carson Beck a moment ago, and I want to ask you about this because, look, I talk about Georgia football for a living, and then when I leave work, I go to my life and talk about Georgia football with the people I kind of run into, whether it be, wherever you're at, people are just sort of having these conversations. And pretty consistently, one of the things I'm hearing in my private life a lot are people who are just, kind of wondering, what's going on with Carson? 3 games, not quite yet looking like the Heisman Trophy winner, not quite yet looking like the number 1 overall draft pick. These are things that I think are legitimately part of the potential for Beck here this year, and thus far probably hasn't quite gotten into that realm as of yet. I think you and I have talked about this some on the air too. Just for people who are kind of still kind of wondering about this, what do you make of Carson thus far, and what does it need to be going forward, do you think?
Yeah, so what I've seen is you see the high end, right? I mean, he is as capable as any quarterback in college football right now, and he can make all the big plays. What I think the biggest critique is, can we make the easy look easy? And there's times where there are plays that can be had or decisions that can be made that to just make the game a little bit easier for him and really for this entire offense that we've missed on. And, it's a small sample set. And again, he is as capable, if not more capable, than anyone at the position at this level. So that's the reason why the standard is so high and the expectations are so high, is because you know what a guy like Carson is capable of, and you want to see that. And hopefully, as this season plays out, you look at his entire body of work, and it's exactly what we expect it to be, and that's exceptional. And it's making the mundane look super easy and making some of the difficult look easy. Which you look at again against Kentucky. There are some balls that he fits in the tightest of windows, and you go, wow, that's impressive. I'm thinking of the first down conversion to Dylan Bell and some other plays where you're going, this guy is special. And then there are some other opportunities with a wide open wide receiver that's crossing the deep middle, and you're going, a better ball right there, and it would have been a different scenario. So I think it's just the consistency, especially with the quote-unquote easier plays that can be made, that will allow his play to match the expectations and the potential that we all see from Carson.
Got a couple things to follow up with you before we let you go, but let me, before John, remind folks that we also, as a way of making it as big as possible, on Saturday have a DawgNation Invasion event taking place in Tuscaloosa, the day of the game. Huge tailgate experience, obviously a Friday night party there as well. Our friends at ATL Sports Strips making all this happen. And if you want to get one of those T-shirts, one of our DawgNation Invasion T-shirts, as we take over Tuscaloosa on Saturday, be one of the first 150 to sign up, and you get your chance to do that. And we got a lot of options for you out there right now. If you want the travel package, which includes a night stay on Friday night before the game and after the game there on Saturday night, kind of in the kind of Hoover, Birmingham area, our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips have got that for you. If you just want either the Friday night party or the tailgate on Saturday, we can do tickets just for that. We've also got kind of the cool option that's come out there as well and people, I guess, had been asking about this, and so they're kind of trying to provide this as an option, that if you've got either your room taken care of or you just don't need one because you happen to live in the area, but you don't want to fool with the parking and things like that, if you want to meet the motor coach there in Hoover, go to the tailgate on Saturday on the bus, and then come back after the game without ever having to park in Tuscaloosa, which is probably a pretty good idea if that's what you'd like to do. If you want to do that, our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips have got you hooked up on that too. You can inquire about how to be a part of that kind of portion of our event too. So bottom line is, there's a party on Friday night, there's a tailgate on Saturday, there's an opportunity to travel package, which includes trip over to Tuscaloosa there for the tailgate on game day. So to be a part of our DawgNation Invasion event and to get the DawgNation Invasion T-shirt, be a part of the great tailgate, DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. Can't wait to see you all in Tuscaloosa there on Saturday. All right, John, very quick before we let you go here, a couple of things. Thing number one is this. People also talking about the Georgia offensive line right now, especially in light of Tate Ratledge's injury. Tell me what you're seeing right there. And it is certainly a step up in weight class now to have to try to block Alabama on the road. It seems like at times even offensive line communication. Listen, I'm not smart enough to know this. I am over my skis and speaking above my knowledge when I say this. But certainly people that I know and respect, have kind of mentioned communication among offensive linemen as maybe one of the things that Georgia could improve on going into Saturday. So give me a little bit of a quick thumbnail sketch on where you think the Georgia offensive line is right now as it gets ready for a pretty stiff challenge against the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about, what fans have seen, is there's a number of missed assignments or mental errors. We call them either MAs or MEs, where they're unblocked defenders or we're on edges, and that's got nothing to do with ability, because our offensive line, even without Tate Ratledge, and I think Tate Ratledge is a great guard, a really, really talented player. So missing him would hurt any offensive line. I'm grateful that Georgia has been able to recruit at such a high level that your sixth offensive lineman is Micah Morris, who probably pound for pound is one of the most powerful guards in college football. But what we've seen is whether it's Ernest Green or Micah Morris or some of the other more seasoned veterans, there have been times, and it's not constant, but there have been times where they haven't been on the same page, and there's an unblocked defender in the hole, or it's a pass protection and blitz pickup where there's either confusion or someone's on the wrong assignment. And that's a little concerning when you expect this group to be able to perform at a high level. And it's similar to Carson, where you know what they're capable of, and their abilities at times are just shining so very brightly that the bar has been raised and the expectations are through the roof. So when there are these mental errors and missed assignments, then it hurts the overall product, and it can be drive killers. And because of the veteran nature of this offensive front, it is expected to be a strength and will need to be in these big games. And I think at times it's just been a little bit concerning that they haven't always been on the same page. And even if it's a rotation of 6 or 7 guys, Monroe coming in at tackle or Micah in the rotation on the inside, the expectation is that there's no drop-off and everyone is able to play at that high level. So I think more than anything, what I'm going to be keying in on is the other side of the ball, is our defensive front against Alabama's offensive line. What we saw the last time these two teams faced, that was, for lack of a better word, the Achilles heel of this Georgia team. Is they put us in a phone booth and beat us up front, and we didn't have the horses to kind of match their attack. And it was a little bit passive, and Milroe had time in the pocket, and when they needed to run it, they were able to do it, and they won the trench battle, Alabama's offensive line against our defensive line. And it's a little bit more concerning this go-round just because of the lack of availability for some of our key players. We're down to number 3 on the depth chart in some positions, interior defensive line. So I think it's going to be a big challenge for Georgia's defensive line against Alabama's offensive line, more so than what we see on the other side of the ball.
So a simple question to conclude our conversation. You think Georgia wins on Saturday?
You better believe it. Yeah, I'm pumped, man. I'm fired up. I can't wait because there's been so much talk, and I feel like I know what this Georgia team is capable of. And a slighted, undervalued, very talented team is a dangerous proposition. And I think that's where Georgia sits right now. I think they use all the little sparky comments and snarky comments as fire for let's prove to the world that we are the number 1 team in the country, and justifiably so. And there's only one way to do that. You have to earn it on the field. And I look forward to Saturday being that proving ground for Georgia.
I think that's really fun, John. Great stuff. I love your insight. You bring so much to the table. Thank you so much. Enjoy the week. Enjoy the game. And next time we talk, hopefully we're talking about Georgia sitting at 4-0. That'll certainly be a fun conversation, John. We'll look forward to doing it with you next week.
I can't wait. I'm pumped up. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC 3.
I love it, man. I love it. I love having great former players like John on. I love sinking our teeth into a big game like this. Just sort of fun to do, right? It's like, I don't know. It just makes the fall great. Makes it so much fun. You got, if you live in the state of Georgia where I do, you got Braves Mets this week. That's a big deal. Obviously, the world champs were in Atlanta last night. Sports is just one of those great things that just accompanies life and just makes the week fun. It's fun. And we're obviously a little edgy about Alabama, but nonetheless, that's the kind of thing that makes a good, fun week. Like everything is just going to be great this week because everybody's so fired up about all of this. It just, obviously for us, primarily Georgia against Alabama, it's just like, what a great week and what a great way to get it kicked off with Jon Stinchcomb right there. Now, what I'm not edgy about, and what I frankly, every now and then when I get a little too much, I sort of close my eyes and seek the peace and the tranquility that only comes from a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I I love the thought of that. And one of these days, I can't wait to be back on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship again. There's been some chatter around the house about when we might be taking our next Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I hope it's soon, and I hope it's on Utopia of the Seas, because if you're watching on video, why would you not want to do that? If you're watching on video, what you saw on there was it's called the Aqua Theater. It's on the back of the ship. It's kind of interesting. Icon of the Seas has sort of put its Aqua Theater in kind of a different spot, but on the Oasis class ships, the Aqua Theater is on the back of the ship. It's a really, I think, really cool part of the aft, to use a little nautical term there, because it's where the high dive show takes place. And it's an amazing thing to see how the performers, I mean, from like 30 feet in the air, will jump into this very small pool while the ship is moving. It's an amazing thing. It's part of the boardwalk neighborhood. And, you know, one of the things that makes Utopia of the Sea so much fun are all the various neighborhoods on the ship. So many different ways to have fun and enjoy all the cool things going on. One of the reasons why I always recommend these Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, because if you want to have the most fun you can possibly have, and for you and the entire family, obviously a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is the way that happens. So Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. Jessica is a friend. She's done a lot of really great things to help make my, cruise vacations as much fun as they can possibly be. And I really do believe that she'll do the same thing for you. So please give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Royal Caribbean has said, our good friend Robin, who works for Royal Caribbean, has said, listen, anytime you're booking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, Jessica's just going to make it a better experience for you. A great travel agent is going to make you get the most out of that. And so she heartily recommends doing that. Jessica's been great for me, and she'll be great for you there on that there as well. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here for a moment. Let me be philosophical about one thing just for a second. We're all like in some form or fashion in life in sort of search of the truth. We always want to know what the truth is, right? It seems like sometimes these days finding the truth is not always super easy. So here's one little thing I always do to try to at least give me a little bit of a clue about what the truth in any given situation might be. The truth is never 100% what you want it to be. It's possible to be mostly right about something. It is. But the absolute truth is never absolutely what you want it to be. There's always a hard part. There's always an unfortunate part. There's always a part that you sort of wish was a little different than it is. And that's in everything. I will not be explaining further. But in everything, that's just kind of the way that it goes. I think that's also the same thing for college football there as well. But if you look at the truth of the current moment, there is a lot that Georgia fans have to like. Their team is playing very well. Hated rivals like Florida are down bad. Auburn is down very bad right now. Tech lost again on Saturday. You can just sort of roll through the various rivals of UGA, and some of them to varying degrees, but to a certain extent, almost all of them have either experienced a lot of hard times or currently experiencing very hard times, that it's just a good time to be a Georgia fan in light of all of that. However, to go back to the statement that I made a moment ago, the absolute truth is never 100% of absolutely what you wish it was. You can't have a scenario where all of your rivals are down at the same time, probably, and there's always going to be an unfortunate part of the truth that is true whether you want it to be or not. I think an example of that's happening up north in Knoxville. I think Tennessee's pretty good. I do. Auburn may be terrible. Florida may be terrible. Georgia Tech may be of zero consequence. I think Tennessee, another team that most of you hate, I think they're pretty good. I do. And I've been saying that since before the season began. Every data point from this season has reinforced that. And I think winning at Oklahoma on Saturday for Tennessee was more proof of that. I think that Tennessee's pretty good. Now, what is that equal to for this season? We'll find out. But I think there's something interesting going on with the Vols, that more people saw them on Saturday than have perhaps seen them all year long. And in one respect, I think that Saturday was a continuation of what has been a season-long trend for them. I think that everybody looks at the rise of Tennessee, or at least, air quotes are on rise, but the fact that Tennessee has certainly risen in the rankings since the season began. And I think they think this coincides with the rise of Nico Iamaleava as the quarterback. And I think that Nico's fine, and he's certainly an elite talent. There's no doubt about that. And I believe that he's probably – he's from a talent perspective, the most talented quarterback that Josh Heupel's probably ever coached. We'll see performance-wise what that equals to compared to Hendon Hooker in 2022. But as of now, I would say that the performance is kind of only okay. The talent is way up there. I would say the performance is kind of only okay. That people think that Tennessee is ranked as high as it is because of how great Nico is. I would say that Nico's been fine. What's really been remarkable about Tennessee is they're playing much better defense. And on Saturday, that was the case once again. And you can say, well, the Oklahoma offense is probably not very good. Well, it's probably not. But we could play this game over and over again with everybody. The same way we don't think people are giving Georgia enough credit for beating Clemson. We could also just choose never to give Tennessee any credit for anything because we don't like Tennessee. But at a certain point in time, hopefully we're more self-aware than some of those, folks down I-20 or across I-20 in Alabama when it comes to talking about their own team. That we may not want Tennessee to be good, but that alone is not enough to prevent Tennessee from being good. And when you start to think about the toughest games that Georgia's going to play this season, I think Tennessee's got to be on that list. I really do. What they've done through 4 wins here thus far this season, I think it's pretty impressive. And I think they're probably a pretty formidable challenger and a very big home game looming for the Dogs in the month of November. A different story here. LSU got a win against UCLA on Saturday. I think LSU's got some real problems. I mean, UCLA, I believe, is one of the worst Power 4 teams in the entire country. It took LSU a little while to pull away in this game. And now we find out that the star linebacker for LSU, Harold Perkins, his season's going to end because of an injury. And given the fact that he's a third-year player, you would also presume his career at LSU may be over now there as well. And what a strange situation this is. Do y'all remember Harold Perkins as a freshman? This was a guy this is 2022 when they won the West. This was a guy that was individually taking games over. Go back and watch the highlights of the Arkansas game that year. I mean, he was like Superman. He completely took the game over. And then after that, and I'm not in Baton Rouge, so I can't necessarily explain this. And as I said before, there's a lot of, the sort of nuts and bolts of the football part that probably just goes over my head. But they sort of made the decision to kind of move him inside. His NFL position is probably an inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker. And he was never the same player ever again. He just became kind of a part of the defense as opposed to what he was in 2022 was like a one-man defensive wrecking crew. He just never really became that again. What a strange thing. And now, after entering the league with as much fanfare as anyone could ever have, he'll sort of seemingly exit the league with a little bit of a whimper. And it's not his fault that he got injured. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting that when you look at what LSU is squandering, they wasted a Heisman Trophy season from Jaden Daniels last year. I think that Garrett Nussmeier is a pretty good quarterback. They seem on the verge of wasting him too. Didn't they just waste the career of Harold Perkins? And by the way, some of that may be, defensive linemen help linebackers to a certain extent the same way offensive linemen help skill position players. When the defensive linemen occupy blockers, it creates space for linebackers to go make plays. And for the most part, Harold Perkins never played behind a very good LSU defensive line, so therefore there were just a lot more bodies just to sort of swallow him up with blocks. So maybe that's an example of this. But when you look at the Brian Kelly era thus far in Baton Rouge, it's a lot of squandering some pretty talented dudes because you didn't have your business taken care of in other places. And I would say that Harold Perkins may be one of the biggest examples of that. Very quickly, I'll also mention that Missouri had to struggle to beat Vanderbilt on Saturday. So college ball's a crazy sport. Vanderbilt loses at Georgia State. Then the next week goes on the road to a top 10 team and almost pulls the upset. And for a moment, it seemed like they might. So college ball's obviously a crazy sport. And as I talked to Jon Stinchcomb about, there's also the kind of the small sample size thing here of we're going to make a very big deal about limited data. We've only had a third of the regular season, 4 weeks worth of the regular season. But in the case of Missouri, we've now got a Boston College game in which they were somewhat closer than the experts thought, a Vanderbilt game in which they were way closer than the experts thought. We really haven't gotten the top 10 version of Missouri yet, the team that beat Ohio State in a bowl game version of Missouri yet. And I'm starting to get suspicious we might not see it. In other words, there's only so much room for so many teams at the top. And this is not a perfect way to think about this, but it's the way that I think about it. if a team like Tennessee is elbowing their way in, then someone gets elbowed out in the process. And I almost wonder if the team likely to regress is not a Missouri, that a year after a pretty, remarkable accomplishment of, getting to the top 10, beating Ohio State in a bowl game, that following up on that act is just sort of becoming a pretty difficult thing to do. And I'll also say this really quick, that I think that there's a challenge here for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And for the most part, they fail every challenge they're ever given. But, one of the things that made Missouri a highly ranked team to begin the season was not just the talent the team had, but some of this was also the schedule that it played. And so I think there's got to be some sort of qualitative analysis going on here, not just the quantitative analysis of how many games are you winning, but how are you winning those games? And if Missouri somehow does keep winning this way, but less impressive against less than stellar competition, then I think it's got to be a little bit of a ding against them. So one final story to get to here. Auburn lost to Arkansas on Saturday. Now, as I said to start the show, when we have a bias or an agenda, we're completely out in the open about it. And on this show, we are totally 100% in the tank for Sam Pittman. I've always just really liked Sam Pittman. I liked him because he was very good at Georgia. I also like the fact that there's just sort of a regular dude coaching an SEC team. It's like he's just seemingly a guy, kind of comfortable in his own skin, not trying to be something that he isn't. I just always really liked Sam Pittman for his contribution to Georgia, but I also like the fact that there's a multitude of personality types within the SEC. I think that Pittman represents kind of a cool archetype of what a coach maybe could be. And if we're being completely honest, our last time to celebrate a Sam Pittman victory of note may have been Saturday. And if that's the case, boy, we love it. We love it. On the flip side of this, it's becoming pretty apparent pretty quickly that Auburn's not very good. And we were sort of on this after the Cal game, that when they got beat by Cal at home in kind of a non-competitive effort, that to me was a little bit of a signal that, man, this is an Auburn team that just sort of seems to have its eyes on 2025. But nonetheless, people are starting to notice the way in which the losses are really kind of piling up. And as a different gambling expert I saw online this weekend kind of pointed out, a lot of these games that Auburn's losing are also coming when they are point spread favorites. And I think some of that's based on sort of the built-in perception what Auburn is, because they at least have some high school talent that they've been recruiting. Auburn hasn't exactly been recruiting very well, but they've at least been doing some things. But Saturday sort of felt like a little bit of a new low. And to sort of make matters worse, after the game, the Auburn coach Hugh Freeze, who is frankly no one's favorite coach for the most part because of all the sordid details of his personal life in the past, Auburn coach Hugh Freeze really threw his quarterbacks under the bus in a way that a lot of people found very distasteful. It's amazing to me how, everybody's always talking about everything from a college football weekend, but some things get talked about a little bit more. There were a lot of people who were really unhappy with Hugh Freeze on Saturday night after he said this.
Unfortunately, this is what I know, and I know that there's people open, and I know that we're running the football. And we got to find a guy that won't throw it to the other team. And we got to find running backs that hold on to it. The scheme is what most everybody in the country is running some sort of. But you've got to have good play at quarterback for sure at whatever system you're going to choose.
So Hugh Freeze just absolutely just throwing his quarterback, and in this case, I guess two quarterbacks, under the bus here. A tough look there for sure. And I think that we're hopefully well known. We don't do that sort of thing. We don't call out players. We don't embarrass players. It just feels weird. I'm now old enough to be most of these guys. Not most of them, all of them. I could be any player's dad now. I'm at least technically old enough to be their father, even though my kids are, a good bit younger than that. I'm technically old enough to be their dads. It seems weird to call them out in the way that Hugh Freeze just called out, Auburn right there. That's always seemed somewhat strange to me to do. But to give you a slightly different take on this than you're hearing other places, let me just say this. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have more of this moving forward in college football. Back before like the full-on advent of the NIL era, I think there was an extent to which that the player coach relationship was truly relational, that coaches were supposed to like publicly be seen as caring for their players, not always backed up by their private actions, but that was supposed to be the public persona of, man, I'm a coach and I'm just in it for these kids. And everything I say publicly has got to back that up, even if it's not always true and genuine. But in the NIL era, I do believe that the relationship between coach and player and the relationship between program and player is about to get, instead of relational, more transactional. You're paid to do a job as a player, and if you don't do it, then why should you be absolved from criticism any more than I am? And for someone like Hugh Freeze, whether this is the right attitude or not, he may say, hey, my very well-paid job is on the line based on how you play. You're also getting paid well. Even, middling quarterbacks are at least getting some NIL money. You're also getting paid well too. So I want the finger of blame on you more so than on me, because my job is also potentially on the line. That may feel gross, but I do believe we're moving into a transactional age when it comes to college athletics. And here's the other thing too, is that sometimes there's a method to madness, and some of the statement from Hugh Freeze might not only have been a reflection of sort of the transactional age of NIL means you're an employee in this situation just like I am, whether you're actually described as one or not, but it's also maybe an open for business sign and a help wanted sign of, hey, quarterbacks, not only do we have NIL money to spend, we've got playing time to give. And we're not happy with our current situation here. So if you're a guy who'd like to start in the SEC in 2025, we're open for business. That may seem a little bit gross, but it may also be a little bit of a reflection of the age in which we currently live, and that is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me take a moment here to give a shout-out before we get ready to go to our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Obviously, we get a big, fun golf outing here coming up soon with the Finish Long Drink, and obviously so many of you enjoying the Finish Long Drink when you're out there playing golf and having a good time and doing things like that. Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Strong, Long Drink Zero, Long Drink Traditional, that's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. That's my favorite. That's my good friend Kaylee Manziel. I believe that's her favorite there as well. So make sure you try all of that today. In fact, if you want to go online, you can go to thelongdrink.com. You can learn the story about how the long drink kind of came to America and now in Georgia. And you can also figure out where you can try some for yourself. So find some online. It's thelongdrink.com, or wherever you're doing your beverage shopping, things like that. You'll probably see the Finish Long Drink there as well. This really fun, ready-to-drink cocktail is ready for you. So make sure you enjoy that today. By the way, tonight, DawgNation video channels. How about this for our buddy Mike Griffith? Paul Feinbaum going to be on with him. So Paul Feinbaum today, normally it's Paul, I guess, asking Mike the questions. Tonight on video, it'll be Mike asking Paul the questions. So the tables will be turned there on that ahead of the Georgia game against Alabama there on Saturday. So that's a lot of fun. Golden Shoe today. Speaking of Georgia rivals being down bad. So Florida did go on the road, get a win against just absolutely heinous Mississippi State team. Our Reddit CFB, the account that's connected to the college football Reddit page, says that Florida-Mississippi State is appointment television. Winner's going to get enough momentum to make next year's college football playoff. The loser, well, they're going to get relegated to the Southland Conference. The Southland Conference then retweeted that by saying, no thank you. Georgia on Tap shared that with me, saying, well, this is just delicious. And it is indeed Georgia on Tap. We'll give a golden shoe to our buddy Georgia on Tap, the Southland Conference, and everybody involved there on that. That's a lot of fun. Lousy, stinking Gators. They may beat Mississippi State. Those Bulldogs, a little easier for them to take down. But the Georgia Bulldogs, that hasn't happened in 1,416 days. And we don't see it happening anytime soon. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, let's find out what's going on with all of you. We'll get your comments here. Then we'll get ready to bounce out of here after that, if I can get into my computer. All right, here we go. Let me go to YouTube first here today. See how folks are doing there. By the way, Georgia on Tap in the YouTube comment section here, able to take a victory lap after his Golden Shoe win today. Alco O'Neill says that Georgia owns Florida, period. And that's a fun thing to be able to say. But that has certainly been the case for sure. KC says, he's talking with Greg Rosenberg, that Georgia needs to sack Milroe 4 to 5 times. They did 4 times in the SEC championship. The fumble, offside penalty, and the missed field goal hurt us. Yeah, you're right. Some of those miscues probably, cost the game for sure. Also, the bad call on Isaiah Bond didn't help. But getting after the quarterback is going to be paramount. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Aaron Dixon says, is Mississippi State worse than Vanderbilt? I think so. Mississippi State's really, really bad. Really, really bad. Wyatt Fielden says, what kind of mood will Kirby be in today? Good seeing you yesterday. Wyatt, great seeing you too, Wyatt. Absolutely. Great seeing you indeed. My guess is, so usually pretty what's the word? Terse? Is that the word? My guess is we get terse Kirby on Saturday. In other words, not very fired up. Just it's the old "I'm just here so I don't get fined." My guess is it's the "I'm just here so I don't get fined" version of Kirby. He doesn't want to. Sometimes coaches like Kirby will use the media to sort of send a message to the players. I don't think he wants to do that. I don't think he wants to say anything. No information. I'm talking about if it's possible to give negative information, less than zero information about Warren Brinson and Mikael Williams and Jordan Hall, there will be less than zero information given about them. Nothing of, what'd you do during the bye week? Nothing. It is just going to be nothing. It may be less than nothing. Kirby's goal is for us to have no clip to play on tomorrow's show. That's probably Kirby's goal, to have no clips that BA can use. That's probably the goal, and I'm guessing he'll come pretty close to getting it because on Tuesday he almost achieved that. Jay Shipe says he misses the chemistry that JT Daniels had with the Georgia receivers. Off-season continuity isn't there with Beck and his wide receivers. Beck, oh, come on. See, here I am. I thought Jay was making a regular football comment. I should have known better. But here's one thing I'll always say about JT Daniels. If you go back and look, and this is always, I think people forget this. I think that people think of JT Daniels and those small number of games that he played in as sort of the apex of Georgia's passing attack. But the truth is that while he was record-setting against Mississippi State that night in 2020, you realize that Georgia scored 31 points? Do you know how mad most of y'all would be in most games if Georgia only scored 31 points these days? That for whatever reason, even though JT would often have a lot of passing yards, Georgia just didn't score very many points in the JT Daniels era. I think it's always sort of easy to forget that, is that, for whatever reason, they just didn't necessarily do a lot of that. Oh, as our producer, Jay Black, points out, one rushing yard will certainly hurt you there. But it's another kind of, but that's also, kind of that's part of it, though. Bobby Mean says, I feel like the media is taking us for granted. They have no idea what they are in store for come Saturday in Tuscaloosa. I think we sacked Milroe at least 3 times for 3 turnovers in a close win. Yeah, obviously I've kind of bumped into this before. You come across as very paranoid, and by you, I mean me. You come across as very paranoid when you make it sound like everybody's out to get you. That's what I guess paranoia is. But I am fully 100% of the belief that most people do not think it's good that Georgia would run roughshod over college football, essentially trying to strangle the life out of their opponents. I would say that's not what most people want college football to be. One team controlling all of the top talent, winning all of the games, doing so in such a fashion that the fourth quarter is never viewed. Think about how many games that Georgia's played in the last few years that were essentially non-entities in the fourth quarter. Like if you live in a boardroom around college football, conference commissioner, TV executive, things like that, like that's not good for the sport. It's good for us, but it's not good for the sport. And it's not Kirby Smart's job to be good for college football. It's Kirby Smart's job to be good for Georgia. But I do think a lot of us would be wise to sort of recognize the conflict that exists between what's good for Georgia, what has been good for Georgia, and what's good for college football overall. I talked to you last week about 3 years worth of just remarkable coincidence that just so happens that Georgia's opponents are some of the least penalized, teams in America 3 years in a row. That Georgia's had among the fewest penalties called on its opponents 3 years in a row. Ever since, weirdly, Georgia wins a national championship in 2021, and ever since then, down at the very bottom of penalties called on opponents 3 years in a row. Media seemingly aligned against Georgia, whatever. And some of that, I'll totally be honest with you, is we are more sensitive to that because it's our team. That's just that is just human nature. That is human nature. Humans are emotional creatures. And it never sounds good to hear somebody cheering for your opponent. It just never sounds good. Just doesn't. But nonetheless, doesn't ever seem to quite break the other way, which just sort of seems like it might. So yeah, we're a little on guard about stuff like that. Speaking of which, Yard Dog says the fact that most people are writing off Georgia against Bama is a wonderful thing. I like our odds for no other reason than Saban thinks we're better. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Now, there's also some Georgia fans who, it's kind of funny how all of this sort of turns into like four-dimensional chess. There are a lot of people who also believe that Saban is getting ready to try to give Georgia rat poison. Making a pick of Georgia on the set only to later on be able to act like he gave Alabama the motivation it needed in the game. There are a lot of people who are saying be on guard for that, which is sort of a funny angle to consider. Randy Hall also asked about which high school game we have this weekend. Randy, I'm really excited about this. I'm so glad you asked. What if I told you got a chance to see the 5-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin on TV on Friday? How is that for a lead into Georgia-Bama on Saturday? And what if I told you that obviously he's got his great teammate there as well, Guyton, and then against another potential future dog on the other side, we're going to see Savannah Christian travel north, take on Blessed Trinity. Of course, DJ Jacobs, the tremendous prospect there for them in the class of 2027. It's 2027, right? Either way, he's a tremendous prospect. Blessed Trinity hosting Savannah Christian on TV on Friday. Man of the hour in many respects, Elijah Griffin. Boom, we got him on Friday. I'm so excited. So excited. My good friend Rusty Manziel has done a great job, along with I.J. Rosenberg and everybody else, of giving us a really strong schedule. I believe this is the best schedule we've ever had. At least it certainly has played out that way thus far. And we've got more really big games to come. So, and big games including big prospects to come too. So I'm thrilled. I love having Elijah Griffin on TV. I'm so excited about that. So excited about that. DT checking in. Good to see him in the comment section today. Roger says, don't expect the penalty situation to change this weekend, not against Bama in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, it'll be worth watching. It'll be worth watching. I mean, look, the one thing that we don't do, even though we are somewhat, I'm at least open, to conspiratorial thinking sometimes. I'm not saying I believe every conspiracy theory that's out there, but I'm at least open to having those conversations in some cases. Obviously not. We don't make a big deal about fishing. You've never heard us make a big deal about that. But the one with Bond last year in the first half of the SEC championship game was a blunder, and we never got a fair hearing on that. The SEC, and by we, I mean all of us who care about the game, the SEC's explanation on that stunk to high heavens. And so, yeah, I mean, it ought to be in the spotlight. It ought to be in the spotlight for Saturday for sure. And anything you can do, listen, basketball coaches are great at this. Anything you can do to work the refs is, generally speaking, kind of a smart thing to do. Now, berating them doesn't usually get things in your favor, but, you know, working the refs is a part of sports. Trippy Charlie on the subject of the defensive line injuries. Yeah, so as I said before, we're going to hopefully get more on that today. My guess is we don't get much. If I had to guess, we'll have availability report on Wednesday. And, I mean, I'm thinking you get a lot of questionables. If I had to guess, I'm assuming you get a lot of questionables here this week. Scott Harris on the subject of the Redcoat Band says, I heard the Redcoat Band did not go to Lexington and that they are not going to Austin. Is this true? That could count for a 7-point swing right there. So they did not go to Lexington. That is true. And I noticed it. And because like when fourth quarter, you know, when you drew the phones, there was there's nobody to play the Krypton. And, you know, obviously when I was younger, let's say like even as recently as like the early 2000s, early 2000s, you pretty much had full band at Auburn, South Carolina, Tennessee, you know, any road game that was like 3 or 4 hours away, you pretty much had the full Redcoat Band at all those games. And then for other games, you at least had the pep band. On Saturday, they didn't have a pep band at all. And a pep band is a smaller version of the Redcoats. That's like, you know, almost like what you'd see like a basketball game or something like that. Smaller version of the Redcoats. And on Saturday, they didn't have that at all. Now, what this comes down to, and I've had a few people reach out to me about this, and at some point in time, I do want to try to talk more about this in the show. But what it comes down to is, like everything else, is just money. And the fact that the band occupies a ticket that, you know, you don't just like have a band section. The band sits in ticketed seats. And so that's money. There's money associated with travel. And, you know, apparently whoever it would be that would kind of decide to do this, I guess it's the Athletic Association, I guess, they just don't, they don't want to spend the money. And I reckon the Redcoat Band is not in a position to pay their own way. Obviously, the band would bring in far less money than the football team does. I'm assuming the band doesn't really bring in any money at all. You know, now the university itself, what's always amazing to me, we always talk about stuff like this. Nobody ever brings this up. The university is made of money. You know, people think there's a lot of money in college athletics. There's a lot of money in college. You know, when we get into these kinds of discussions of like, well, who's going to pay for whatever, people never seem to bring up the fact that universities are made of money in a way that almost no other institution in not just American life, global life, almost no institution sleeps on pallets of cash more so than the average university. So if the athletic department does not have enough money to pay for the band to travel to the game because, frankly, it's got a lot of other line items like paying for all the sports that don't bring in any money. If the athletic department does not have enough money to do that, then can I humbly suggest that maybe somebody go and find some, you know, stack of cash that's been left in a corner somewhere, because the college itself is made of money. Maybe they should pay the Redcoat Band to go to the game. But I'm probably getting out of pocket, so let me get back into the business of doing this. Ray Duke says, does anybody agree with me that it doesn't make sense that the conference let Sankey give Missouri and Texas extremely easy schedules? So the Texas thing has bothered some people, and it is a little easier. But it's not just Missouri and Texas. People say that Ole Miss also got an easier schedule too. You know, Missouri's not playing Georgia this year. You know, Ole Miss is not playing Alabama. So moving forward, while most schedules will be more difficult than they used to be because the SEC is just deeper as a league now that Oklahoma and Texas are part of it, there will be a couple of teams every year that probably do have slightly easier schedules. We see this in the NFL as well. And, factoring in the schedules will be a part of how you decide, who's what. I mean, factoring in schedule strength will be a part of this discussion. So I don't necessarily think there's anything nefarious going on with that. Although I was certainly troubled when we knew that somebody was going to get a slightly easy schedule, and just lo and behold, it happened to be Texas that seemingly got it. For a Texas program that was kind of always thought to have gotten preferential treatment in the Big 12, it certainly wasn't the best PR look for the SEC to have Texas get one of the easier schedules here this year. I'm assuming the SEC has enough self-respect not to grant special favors to Texas the way the Big 12 seemingly always did, but there was an element of that wasn't great. Al Chandler says this will be the biggest game that Kalen DeBoer's ever coached in. And I certainly hope, as I've said, and I will keep saying this, his relative inexperience in games like this, I hope it matters. I hope it matters. I hope something happens on the Alabama side that makes all of us say, Bama fans, Georgia fans alike, this is my wish for the game, that something happens that makes us all say, wow, Nick Saban's not coaching Alabama anymore. That wouldn't have happened to a Nick Saban Alabama team. I hope that's the case. Miriam Corbin says you're exactly right, B.A. UGA has major bucks and should pay for the band to be there. Even if it's just a smaller version, they need to be there. Yeah, I miss the Redcoats. I really like the Redcoats. I always have. And, it's easy to say, well, the Athletic Association ought to pay for it. But, the Athletic Association also has a lot of things it's supposedly supposed to pay for out of the goodness of its heart. At a certain point in time, I do think, and this is true for Georgia and everywhere, at a certain point in time, the actual universities themselves have got to stop getting all the free marketing that sports provides them, and they got to step up and pay some too. Because remember, for every scholarship athlete at Georgia, that's money that goes to the university. The Athletic Association, through its scholarship funds, are paying the university for the student being in the school. So in addition for all the free marketing that the athletic teams bring to Georgia, you've also got the value of the student sitting in the classroom, and we know how much colleges are making off all of that. It never goes down. The price never goes down. There are no market factors influencing college prices at all. So maybe somebody somewhere should find a few dollars to send the Redcoat to a road game. Seems like a pretty good idea to me. Matthew Goodwin says it makes me cringe when I hear people say that the game will be easier because Nick Saban's not coaching. That's rat poison. Well, what I said is I'd like to see DeBoer make a coaching error. I can't guarantee that he will, but I'd like to see that. And at least theoretically, the game should be easier. If Alabama had its choice, would it rather still have Nick Saban as coach or Kalen DeBoer? I believe it'd rather have Nick Saban. So, at least theoretically, the game should be at least a little bit easier, but that doesn't guarantee that it will be. Lynn Shipman, good to have you in here today. Got a chance to see Lynn the other day over at the UGA bookstore. That was really fun. All right, let's do a couple of more comments. We're going to get ready to get out of here after that. Taylor Russell says we must have our third down defensive song. That's right. Yeah, the dun-dun. Have y'all noticed that's kind of become a little bit of a meme? I guess people, for whatever reason, are using that from the game, from the video game. I don't even know what it's called, but the dun-dun-dun-dun. They've kind of turned that. That's a little bit of a meme that you'll sometimes see online if you spend way too much time on the internet. Greg Rosenberg says, I have a friend who has 9-figure wealth, big booster, but he hates giving to NIL. Nobody wants to do it. I do think there is a pretty serious perception problem with NIL for some people who have the means to give to NIL. I do think the notion of NIL suffers from a little bit of a perception problem. And I don't know that it necessarily should, but I do think it kind of does. Now, there are also some boosters who like the idea of being, the benefactor, and they kind of want that, kind of prestige. But it does not surprise me to hear that a very rich person who could give as much as he wanted to, seemingly, just doesn't really want to. But it's also one of those things where rich people don't like becoming less rich. And most of the NIL giving that has been in place thus far has all kind of been predicated on rich people being willing to become less rich so that their team could win more. There's only so much of that that's going to go on. You know, when it comes to like Ruiz down at Miami with his Life Wallet company, you know, Life Wallet was sort of built with NIL sort of baked into the corporate charter. Now, that company's also failed, but, you know, most people, most companies, you know, people have businesses that would like to contribute NIL. They just have business plans in place and investors that are expecting a certain, you know, investors into a business that are expecting certain payouts and things like that. That you can't just willy-nilly say, okay, well, now our number one line item is going to be paying for all these, you know, football players. Most businesses just don't really work that way. So therefore, if you want to do this for your alma mater, you're kind of paying from your personal holdings. So when people always talk about, like, you know, Nike's investment into Oregon, like most of that, my understanding is a personal investment from Phil Knight, not a, I mean, Nike's a global, you know, giant corporation. They can't just like start funneling money into the chairman's alma mater. That, yeah, they have investors losing their mind about that. But Phil Knight can give all the personal money he wants to give, and right now he does want to. At least that's what it seems to be the case. And, you know, some people do want that, but not everybody does. That, you know, we all like college athletics, and a lot of us are, you know, kind of we just sort of get the, you know, get what it is. But there are a lot of people who don't really get it. And like the recruiting part, I mean, you go back to the old days of recruiting, there were a lot of, you know, I mean, some of us have always loved the soap opera recruiting, things like that, but there are a lot of people, not only do they not follow it, they actively dislike it for a number of reasons. That's a real thing. Kermit Rich gives you Go Silver Bridges. I love that. I think I mentioned this before. My grandfather, who was really responsible for getting me into Georgia football, so for those of you who don't like me, you can blame him. He had an old pickup truck. And on the back of that old pickup truck, he had a great bumper sticker that said, "Go you Silver Bridges." I used to love that thing. Man, I love that thing. I love that thing. For sure. Greg Rosenberg says, imagine Arthur Blank took collections to pay players' salaries and kept all the stadium and TV profits for themselves. That's NIL. I mean, there is a certain extent to which that there's a weird alignment there where, you know, you're kind of asking, you know, people without really any kind of benefit to fund the you know, what have been classified as employees in the eyes of some, you know, while others kind of reap the benefits. There is some of that. Lance D says he thinks that On Cloud is better than Nike. I guess I probably do too. I bought a pair of those. Most expensive pair of shoes I ever bought. I love them. I absolutely love them. This is not an ad. But, you know, I think spending money on shoes is probably a smart thing to do. Way more comfortable than almost anything I've ever worn. Anthony Jones says, what do y'all think about Tennessee hiking prices so ticket holders are fronting the NIL? Yeah, we mentioned this the other day. We're going to wrap up here in a second. Like, I think a lot of people have been just sort of duped by this. Like, Tennessee just raised prices. Like, they didn't, I mean, like, it's been sort of sold to the public as a 10% surcharge that going to athletic talent. But we're never going to see the books to see what part of that 10% actually makes its way to the athletes. All they did was just raise the prices. This is the same thing. If you go stay at a nice resort, you know, the room may be X number of $100 a night. There's also a resort fee. So you may be able to say to yourself of, well, I can get this room for blah, blah, blah dollars. But then when you get there, there's all these like add-ons and fees that the secondary ticket market's probably the worst about this right now. It's just sort of you buy a car, there's a destination fee. Like, who knows what any of that stuff is? But businesses are always, and this is just how life works, businesses are always looking for creative ways to raise prices without people complaining too much. And so if you're Georgia, they announced a few weeks ago, hey, we're raising our ticket prices. Sorry, but here's the form to fill out. Georgia can do that because they've won 2 national championships. There's a little bit more of a expectation of we're raising our prices because we're good. And they'll be fine. People aren't going to complain because Georgia's been winning. Well, Tennessee's national championship highlights play on a VHS tape. So they don't quite have the same level of prestige to lean on. So therefore, they need a creative reason why they want to raise ticket prices. And their creative reason is, hey, we need 10% to pay these athletes. Well, in some form or fashion, obviously there will be revenue sharing coming from the pot of money. But this 10% is not directly going to the athletes. It's going into the budget that will be a part of what pays the athletes. It's just a creative way to raise ticket prices. There is no special like book where they have the 10% and somebody's sitting in a room divvying up that 10% to give to the athletes. It's all just going to the same pot of money, and it's just a justifiable excuse in their mind to raise the cost of tickets. Which is not necessarily a bad idea, perhaps. All right, final comments, and then we are gone for good. Back on DawgNation.com for a moment. Savannah Bryan on the subject of Georgia being a little too cooperative with the SEC office over the years. There may have been some of that for sure, Brian. There may have been some of that. Ray Duke on the subject of NIL getting regulated. Look, the only way I think anything like that happens, and it's hard to talk about this without talking about things that are kind of outside the charter of our little show here, but if you look at what's been going on in the courts over the course of the last, like, say, 10-plus years, whatever, my understanding is we don't really have any example of laws changing from where they used to be. But the court rulings have certainly changed. Go back to when I was a kid. If you fought the NCAA in court, the NCAA was going to win. You fight the NCAA in court now, and everybody wins all the time. And the only explanation I have for this is that the opinion about college athletics has really changed. I would say not with the public at large, but with the people who seem to be impacting the public discourse the most, that sort of tiny sliver of very well-educated people who live in very big cities. Almost all of them have decided that, to go back to what Greg Rosenberg said a little earlier, that college is kind of gross, that college athletics is kind of gross, that they just don't like it, that they think that the college sports system that we all love is not good. And so therefore, as that group of people, very well-educated people who live in very big cities, as they've sort of decided that college athletics is no longer good, miraculously, all the court cases are now going against college athletics in a way that they used to have a chance to win in court. Now, what do you do with that? I don't know. But the point here is that if you ever really want some sort of like regulation of NIL or some sort of reprieve from government at all, then I do think you've got to have public opinion change just a little bit. You've got to speak about this in such a way that causes people to align around it. And this is one of the things that I hate the most about the NCAA, is that the people who sort of make up the leadership of the NCAA, they just don't have the guts to argue for their deserved existence. In other words, when they had absolute power, they never felt the need to explain themselves. And now that their power has been threatened, they don't have the guts to defend themselves. And I really am bothered by that they have just been kicked around time and time again, and yet they never really seem to offer. I'm talking about the they here being the people who run this stuff. They never have the guts to offer a defense of why they even exist, an argument for why their continued existence is a good thing. Like, those of us who love college athletics are just being failed by the people who run college athletics because they can't seem to come up with a good argument for why they ought to be in charge or why the thing they're in charge of ought to exist. That's a huge problem. And so right now, the kind of politicians that could get involved in the regulation or the courts, which essentially function like political bodies themselves, like, they're not coming to save any of us right now because, you know, as far as they can tell, public opinion is lined up against college athletics continuing the way that it sort of has in the past. And that's a huge problem and the kind of thing we're not going to solve the week of the Alabama game. All right, it's late. We got to go. It's the latest we've been in forever. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. Air conditioning unit, they can get yours tuned back up to factory fresh specs. It's 100 degrees, y'all. It's almost October, and it's just smoking hot outside still. So get your AC tuned up. Make sure it's still working the way it's supposed to. Find RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. And then I'll see you back here tomorrow. More talk. Big game on Saturday. We're getting you ready for it. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will see you then, everybody.